Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode for you guys. So hopefully you enjoy. I know you guys always enjoy. We've got two big topics to discuss today. First is going to be what's going on in Israel, and second is going to be the topic of abortion. We got a lot of cognitively questions about abortion, so we will be discussing that. But first, we'll talk about what's going on in Israel. Over the weekend, Iran fired a bunch of drones and missiles at Israel. Most of them pretty much made zero damage. The Iron Dome took care of a lot of them. But it was a strong escalation of what the conflict is. Obviously, Iran is making a direct attack on Israel. And it was not without provocation, because Israel has been trying to expand the conflict beyond Gaza. They've claimed that they're tired of missile strikes from Lebanon, so they decided to strike in Damascus. They struck the Iranian consulate in Damascus and killed 2 generals and several officers. Obviously, that is a major escalation on Israel's part, and Iran responded in kind. I think, though, that Iran's attack, even though it was bigger, bolder, generated a lot more news, did a lot less damage to Israel in response. I think it just shows how this conflict can spiral out of control and well beyond the region. But in some ways, a lot of people, or at least the ones that may take it to the next level, don't want to. I think Israel just is aware that the United States is not going to cut off their funding. And even though Biden says, complains about whether they're killing too many civilians, or if they're, going too far in Gaza, or if they're provoking battles outside of Gaza and outside of Palestine. Israel just doesn't give a shit. Israel knows they're not going to cut off the funding, and that's all that matters. And they know they're not going to vote for sanctions against them or any of that sort, so they're confident in this. And this is why it's proving so bad for Biden, this issue, because the Democratic base, or at least the Muslim voters that he's dependent on to win in Michigan and a few other places, understand that Biden's not going to do shit about Israel. They understand that he'll make public statements saying, it's over the top, or we condemn the civilian strikes and we telling them not to kill any civilians. They're still going to do whatever they want. And Israel knows that they have a narrow window of opportunity to do what they want to do, which is ethnically cleanse Gaza. That's clearly the game plan here. And America is not fond of this, and most of the world is not fond of this idea. But they know they can't do shit. And it's the same even with the Arab world. Iran is the only, you got Iran, and then you've got non-state actors of Hezbollah and the Houthis, who are pretty much the only ones who want to fight Israel. Well, Hezbollah is not even trying to provoke a fight. I mean, they have their leader going on about if they do this again, we're going to promise a fight, but they're not going to war, and neither is Iran. Houthis are the only ones who are trying to start up their own fight. I mean, they're one of a kind, so to speak. But the rest of the Arab world is just, they're complaining about it. They don't really like the war, but they're not going to do anything about it. This is no longer the 60s and 70s, where they were surrounded by Arab states that wanted to destroy them. And Israel's existence is no longer at stake in these battles because, as I said, the only state power they have to worry about is Iran. All the others they don't have to worry about. Egypt is basically an ally of Israel. Syria was the last state that wanted to destroy them, but it's incredibly weakened after the Syrian civil war. And Assad doesn't even control he doesn't even control all of his country. Got to change that. I mean, he does control most of it now, but it's an incredibly weakened state, and it can't do shit to an outside power anymore. And Jordan's always been pro-Israel. And then the Gulf states just don't give a shit about this conflict anymore. They have a tense relationship with Israel, but they now have a formal relationship with Israel. And I think the conflict may scuttle formalized relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, but at the end of the day, Saudi Arabia, unlike Egypt and Syria back in, back in the days of the 6 Days War and the Yom Kippur War, are not going to finance like a full-on invasion of Israel. So they no longer have to worry about that. All they have are these irregular non-state actors. Well, Hamas is technically a state actor, but the state it controls is it's almost like Somalia. It's not quite a powerful state. It's a very weak state that they even control. Technically, I mean, depending on your definition, I mean, they are represented in government. But they really just have Hamas, Hezbollah, and then whoever Iran wants to back. But Iran doesn't even want a full-on war with Israel. This is very clear from its actions that it's trying to do in this. And by sending the drone strike on and missile strike on Israel, it's just a way of just saying we're going to respond to our generals, that you just can't completely clown on us. You can't completely show us up on the world stage, and we're going to respond in kind. But I think even the reaction is to pretty much everyone who's observing understands that Iran doesn't really want to escalate this. That this is a reluctant strike on the part of Iran. Iran wants to use its proxies, Hezbollah, Houthis, and Hamas in against Israel, but it does not want to get formally dragged down into a war with Israel. It's also hard for them to get in a war with Israel since they're separated by multiple countries. So it's like with Israel, they don't really. It's not a matter of their existence anymore, as it did with the wars in the 60s and 70s. As I said, I don't really have to worry about this stuff. They really just want to get rid of terror attacks that they may have from Gaza, and they essentially want Gaza to be part of Israel. They think this is their long-term solution. And to go back to what the point I was saying to flesh that out is that they do have this narrow window of opportunity to do this, because they know if they get another chance to do this, and they can see the public perception of Israel radically changing in America. They know that if maybe there's a different Democrat in power, when they maybe have an opportunity to do this in 5 years or 10 years, that person may actually sanction them. That person may cut off their funding. They know that Biden's not going to do that. And they know that Trump would never do that. So this is their last shot to try to get this done. And the rest of the world is also radically changing too with the West. I mean, the Arab world is just like shrugs its shoulders. I mean, this stuff would have been obviously very not popular, to say the least, in the Middle East before, but their main concern is that they don't take in any Palestinians, which is going to piss off their population for a number of reasons. One, that all these people come to their country, and that it also seems to signify an endorsement of Israel's ethnic cleansing. And pretty much all these countries know that this is going to be an extremist element within, or a radical element within their countries, and they don't want that problem. But no one's really going to stop Israel. I mean, Iran is the only state actor willing to challenge them, but even them, they don't really want to have that war. They just want to supply Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis. They don't really want to, have their. First off, it's very hard for them to get. Where are they gonna march their troops to? And it's the same with Israel. Where are they going to march their troops to? That's just kind of an out of the question of whether it is. It still has the potential to escalate into a regional conflict. I mean, Israel could go into Lebanon to take out Hezbollah, and that presents a lot of problems for us. That's a way that it could drag us into this conflict. I mean, it even does look, if you looked at the universal political response to these strikes, every U.S. lawmaker was like, we stand with Israel and that we are prepared to defend Israel's interest. Every politician was making this statement. And that is very worrisome, because that is essentially telling Israel that, like, okay, we're going to complain about what you do, but if this escalates into a regional war, we will join in your favor. And that is just a terrible thing to say. As I've always said with this war, is the main things that we got to be concerned with is no war involvement on America's part, no immigration. We're not taking in any of these Gazans or Palestinians. And then 3, we're not imposing censorship in order to please the Israeli lobby and all these very threatened Jews on college campuses. I mean, you got to really think about their safety. They're seeing people who are criticizing Israel on college campuses. And it breaks my heart every day to think that these students have to undergo that type of trauma. I'm a kid, but that's how conservatives are like this. It's like, you won't believe what Jews are facing on college campuses. They're seeing people burn Israeli flags. It's like, look, who gives a shit? Like, I don't care. It's like they don't get a special carve out in the United States. But a lot of people are thinking that they will. But when it comes to that, it's, even though there's a lot more popular opposition towards Israel's war, and even if you watch the nightly news, if you ever go and watch like what ABC News, CBS, and even CNN, you know how they're covering the war, it is a lot more critical than you would imagine. It's certainly much more critical than how I remember them covering the Lebanon conflict back in 2006, 2007, that Israel was involved in. Then it was like 100% pro-Israel. Today, they primarily cover, it's like Israel's killing more civilians. And it's like we interviewed this Palestinian who remembers a bomb strike on her apartment complex and stuff, or a missile strike on her apartment complex. And they definitely are highlighting a lot of the atrocities and war crimes going on there. And the public support for this conflict is continuing to dwindle. A new CBS poll came out showing a plurality wants Biden to stop Israel's military actions. It's 37%. 12% say increase military actions, encourage them. I guess that's like the Republican position. Keep military actions the same as 28%. Decrease military actions is 23%. And stop is 37%. And that continues to increase. Those numbers are the number of people wanting it completely stopped is an increase from February, which was 31%. Now you do have a majority. You have 60% of the population saying that they want the conflict to de-escalate or to stop in general. And you do have a block of voters, that Muslims, who may not vote for Biden due to this issue. And it is killing morale, as a demoralizing factor for even a lot of the far left base and how they want to go about the war. But Biden is not going to do anything to really push it. I mean, the most thing that they had is having Chuck Schumer calling on Netanyahu to step aside. But that's not direct to the war. It's just addressing Netanyahu and Likud. I mean, they're not going to push for the war to end. Seriously. The way the empire is structured is it's always going to see Israel as an ally, and it doesn't want to pull out. I think it feels that that's too radical of a step for it to do, and they don't want to do it. And also, Biden would piss off a ton of his donors if he managed to pull out. But they're already pissed off as well. So Biden's in a pickle here. There is a funny statement that Trump is perceived both as the most pro-Israel and most pro-Palestinian candidate compared to Biden. I don't know if there's many people who are very sympathetic to the Palestinian side who are wanting to vote for Trump. I just feel that they are saying that there's no real difference between Trump and Biden, so they're just going to stay home as a way to stick it to Biden and to stick it to the Democratic establishment. And in cases that would have an effect on the party. If Biden loses, a lot of that is going to be blamed on Israel, and that is going to push the Democratic Party to go further in a critical direction of Israel. Not quite anti-Israel, but more critical because they realize that an important part of their voter constituencies are not in favor of Israel, and that this is going to cost them elections in the future. And that message will be received among Democrats. With Republicans, the chances of it pushing pro-Israel and within the next 10 years are not very high. I think down the line, I think in the next decade, you could see changes among Republican preferences for this. I mean, because a lot of the voters who deeply care about Israel are not going to be around anymore. I mean, it's both boomers and elderly. So, and more of the younger people who are in Republican Party politics have a very different view of Israel, but it's not going to be for a while. As I always like to point out, is like Thomas Massie is the one elected Republican who could be considered anti-Israel. And he is at risk of losing his seat in a primary this year. So And it's not just Israel, it's also the fact that he was anti Trump and supported DeSantis. But so it's two different factors there. And if he goes, then you really just have Rand Paul, who is much more mild on criticizing Israel. Still, he would be the lone person who would even dare to do such a thing, but he's not as fervent about this as Massey is. But while that's going on with Republicans, Democrats are moving in a more critical direction of Israel. They're trying to have it within boundaries. They are trying to push out some of the more fervent anti-Israel people like Jamal Bowman. They are criticizing like Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and those types. But the party itself is moving in that direction, and it's over time. I mean, this is what that is their base is, and is becoming more anti-Israel. Different perspective on Republicans. As I always say, younger Republicans have a more skeptical attitude towards Israel, or not as interested in the issue itself. They don't really strongly care about it. But younger voters are a small minority among Republicans. Among the boomers and Gen Xers, they're still all pro-Israel. And while a growing portion of the American population grows again or starts to sour on the conflict, they're not that strongly interested in it. They are losing interest in the conflict. It's not one of the most important issues. Now, for Muslims and Jews, it's a different story. But that is both are small minorities in the population. Among the general population, it's not that major of a concern to them. And I mean, with all these foreign conflicts, their level of interest fades away. It's the same with like Ukraine, where everyone was putting on a Ukrainian flag when it first started, and then a few months later, people were like, "What's Ukraine?" It's the same thing is happening with Israel. And as long as we're not getting dragged into a war, most people are just like shrug their shoulders at it. But they are not very supportive of what they do know of it. They're not supportive of what Israel is doing. So with that in mind, it's like, how is the conflict going to end? There's not as much of a pressure campaign to get it finished outside of Biden's electoral concerns in Michigan. But Biden has other matters to deal with if he did go full on and like, you've got to stop this war, and escalating his type of leverage on Israel. I don't believe he is. He's just going to continue to make these statements like, oh, we're working to minimize civilian casualties or this, that. But then when Iran strikes, it's like, we've got all our ships prepared. We stand with Israel. We will do whatever is necessary to defend Israel, which is sending a very clear message to these voters who are concerned about Biden's preferences, and they're more likely to stay home. And if he's still willing to do that, it shows that he's limited on what he's going to do. And he's also just senile. I don't think he's not in control of this administration. So how does this war end? I think the war is just going to end when America bribes Egypt to take in the Gazans. That is not what we want to happen. I think the better thing is just that Israel pulls back. It eventually just says, we get tough with Israel. We're saying war's over. You continue. You're going to get your funding cut, which it doesn't look like we're ever going to make that move. That would be much better, and then they pull out. I think Israel's going to continue the war up until they pressure America into just bribing Egypt to take in these Gazans. And when we bribe Egypt by canceling their debt, there's going to be an underlying assumption that, well, they won't be staying there forever. They're just going to filter out to Europe and America at some point. And that is one of the worst possible outcomes for this conflict, because eventually, this million or so Gazans are going to make their way to the West. And that is going to be a very radical element coming to our countries. And so we don't want more Gazans coming to the West. And I think that's going to be part of the deal that we ever make with Egypt. I do think, and I am very pro-Trump, but I think if the war is still going on by the time that if Trump wins and Trump comes in office, I think Trump will make that deal one of his first things with Egypt. Or some other kind. I don't know who else would take them, but I mean, they're primarily focused on Egypt because they're just like, well, we can maybe get your debt canceled, we can bribe you, we'll do something along these lines. And I think that's eventually how the war is going to end, unfortunately. Something else could change. I mean, maybe there is, like, Biden realizes that Israel, or Biden's handlers realize that Israel's going too far, is that if we keep this going, that there's going to be a major regional conflict, and that's going to drag us into war. And obviously that's going to sink Biden's chances of re-election. And then he tells Israel, it's like, it's over, you're pulling back. And even though there's still going to be a number of Gazan refugees, there's not going to be as many as Israel would like, which Israel would like pretty much the entire land depopulated and, all the population out of there so they can complete their ethnic cleansing. But that's how I see the conflict playing out. I am doubtful that there would be a regional war because you have to have the other side interested in it. And Iran itself does not want, I think, is less eager than Israel for an escalation of the conflict. I don't think that they're actually insistent on it. They just are tired of looking. They do look very weak in some of these strikes though on them. I mean, when we killed Soleimani back in 2020, they didn't really retaliate at all, and we were all worried that like World War III is going to break out, and nothing really happened. And it's the same here. It's like, Israel kills generals, assassinates generals, and they have this strike that's more about creating a buzz than actually striking Israel and making serious damage to Israel. I think it's more on Iran's part because Iran is a very rational actor, more rational than Israel at this point, and they know that a conflict of that magnitude is not in their interest, so they don't want to go for it. And I think that's why I'm pretty positive that there's not going to be that kind of conflict, and they are seeming to hold back Hezbollah. Houthis are another matter. But, so I don't think you're going to get that quite the war. But what happened over the weekend is a reminder that something like this could happen. Maybe the Houthis have been striking ships. There could be some type of escalation out of this conflict that we haven't seen. And based on the responses from our lawmakers, they are perfectly willing to get America into another stupid war just to satisfy Israel. And that's why we want the war to end as soon as possible. And I'm hoping that it can happen, but I'm becoming more skeptical it can. I think that Israel has just figured out that, this is their last opportunity. It's also Netanyahu's last opportunity. He knows that anytime there's next elections, he's out. He wants to accomplish this goal. There's a popular support within Israel for this. They know that America, down the line, that America actually might sanction them or cut them off if they continue to do such a conflict. And they want to accomplish this goal within this window of opportunity they have. So that's my thoughts on what's going on in Israel. Now we're going to move on to abortion. And I got 3 questions on this issue, and pretty much they're all the same. And the 3 people asked were Chud, Dave, and Mystery. And they all asked, and I'm paraphrasing because some of them wrote this longer, is like, how do you think that abortion is going to affect Republican chances in November? Because there's 2 different things that have happened. Is that one, Trump came out and said, I'm for keeping this as a states' rights issue. I do not support a federal ban. And that pissed off the pro-life lobby. And following up on that, the very next day, Arizona Supreme Court ruled in favor of an old 19th century law that effectively bans abortion in all cases except if the mother's life is in danger. And so Arizona now has one of the strictest abortion laws in the country. And that's creating some worries within Republicans on how this issue may play out. So could the issue lose Republicans the election in November? It could. Back in 2022 when the Dobbs decision first came down, I was saying, well, everything's going right for Republicans. The economy sucks. Immigration's terrible. Biden's sucks. He has very unpopular, he's not very popular among the population. It looks like Republicans are going to win. Everything showed signs that Republicans would win. And then they didn't. They didn't have the big wins that they're supposed to. And all the smart set decided it was all Trump's fault, is that if we had just banished Trump and got much better candidates like David McCormick or whoever they were running against Dr. Oz, that they would have won in a landslide. It was all Dr. Oz's fault. And also Herschel Walker's fault. Even though Oz would have had the same problem, or McCormick would have had the same problems as Oz, and Herschel Walker was backed by the establishment. McConnell and all these guys were fully lined up behind Herschel Walker a year before the election. Outside of that, there was a candidate quality thing, but it was more in races, a lot of congressional races, which weren't really impacted by Trump, or Trump's endorsement really wasn't as prominent. There was issues there. There was a candidate quality thing, but they decided that this was all Trump's fault. But if you're looking at issues, Trump was not on the ballot. And what was on the ballot was abortion. And guess what? They did not do well. And ever since then, they've continued to lose referendums on abortion in red states: Montana, Kansas, Kentucky, Ohio. No matter where they put it on a referendum, wherever they put it on the ballot, it loses. They could put it on in Tennessee and it probably would lose. With that in mind, they continue to believe that this issue is overwhelmingly popular. We need to push for a national ban. And so Trump is Trump is saying that it has to stay with the states. And now all these pro-life groups are like, this is a betrayal. They must stick with a national ban. But this is a complete reversal of how they treated abortion prior to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Many people were made these arguments against Roe v. Wade. I mean, the core argument against Roe v. Wade is they thought abortion was wrong. But then they were, when they're making the legalistic arguments about it, they were saying that this is a states' rights issue and that it should be returned to the states. This was a dominant argument against Roe v. Wade, is that we should allow this to be at the states. And now they all thought that this would develop into national attitudes, but that hasn't happened. One is that the issue, ever since Roe v. Wade was overturned, well over 60% of the country believes abortion should stay legal. It's going up to almost 2/3 of the country, which is far higher. And also people care about this much more deeply than they did before. And when they do care about it deeply, they're going on for the pro-choice side. And despite having the biggest victory for the pro-life side ever, these pro-life voters didn't turn out, probably because they don't have the real voters that this is their major issue and they're going to turn them out. I mean, the thing to realize about the pro-life lobby, and I'm not criticizing pro-lifers in general because the base is pro-life, but they care about a lot of other things too. And they care about a lot of other things more than just abortion. But the attitude among the abortion or the pro-life lobby is that there's a ton of single issue voters out there, that this is their major issue, and that if Republicans don't have the hardest line possible on it, that they're going to lose elections. That's just completely not true. Because we saw this in 2022 when they got the biggest victory ever. And they're supposed to, all these single issue voters are going to come out and vote for Republicans. They didn't turn out because they don't exist. Outside, the people who are single issue voters on this work in conservative politics. They work in conservative media. The only reason that this is seen as a much bigger issue or as a dominant issue is because of who works in Republican and conservative politics in DC. It's much more of a top-down issue than people realize. As I said, evangelicals and others, conservatives, do care about abortion, but they care about a lot of other things. They're not going to just stay home because Republicans are not promising a 15-week national ban. And that's not even really what they've been calling for either. For, throughout recent history, when Republican politicians were talking about abortion, they all had to come out for the stance that was enshrined by the new it's an old Arizona law, but was upheld by the Arizona Supreme Court. And that's saying that abortion can only be had in the case of the mother's life, if it's endangering the mother's life, if you don't have an abortion. They didn't want rape and incest exceptions. That was the mandatory stance. And I remember if a Republican politician would have support rape and incest exceptions, they would be hounded and criticized. Now today, it's like their whole position is the 15-week ban, which they're not even good at convincing the public that this is all they want, because they can go to their commentators and to their conservative politicians and find them wanting more radical changes. If they go and see the pro-life movement, they want a full-on ban like the Arizona law. They want to ban birth control. They want to ban IVF. They even want to ban genetic testing. Like, it's a lot of things that are extremely unpopular. And with conservative politicians, even though they all had to come out in favor of IVF because there's overwhelmingly popular support for it, the Republican Study Committee endorsed a proposal, a proposal on abortion that would effectively ban IVF. And so they can easily, if Democrats want to paint Republicans as outside, the American public's opinion on this, they can easily do so. And now some people are saying, oh, well, they should push for this anyway. It's like, we got to stand strong with our principles. The thing is like, if you stand up for if you're like going on the campaign trail and demanding, Arizona style abortion restrictions and ban on birth control and all this stuff, you're just going to lose the election. And you're not going to be able to affect abortion policy. The only way you can affect abortion policy is by winning elections. And what the pro-life lobby is telling Republicans to do is to lose elections. The whole point of the lobby is demanding Republicans just lose in 2024 to satisfy them, despite them not providing any money, really any volunteers. All they provide is all these 20-something women who spend all day at their joke job complaining about how they can't find a good man. So this is what they contribute to Republican discourse. It's all these conservative femcells who are complaining all day about good men and then complaining about how Republican politicians aren't representing their interests and then demanding Republicans be more anti-racist. The thing about the pro-life lobby, I've talked about this before, they're terrible on all the other issues. They don't support abortion restriction, or immigration restriction rather. They're extremely anti-racist. They easily fell for the Covington Catholic hoax. The March for Life immediately disavowed those kids. Before the true story came out, they don't like people to know this. They also didn't stand up for Steve King, despite Steve King being the most pro-life lawmaker in Congress, because he was considered racist. They don't stand up for Trump, despite Trump giving them the biggest victory that they've ever had through these Supreme Court picks. If it wasn't for Trump, they wouldn't even have the ability to restrict abortion. And guess what? They're completely ungrateful and attacking Trump. And they're all the time, their intellectuals and activists are wishing they could vote for Democrats because they're more nicer and respectable. And they don't provide any support for the rest of the coalition. They would immediately give up any other issue that Republicans care about, whether it's guns, immigration, affirmative action, anything else, but they insist that they demand their little issue gets taken care of, despite them providing no support for Republicans in elections. There's no money, there's no real activists. As I said, evangelicals are the base of Republican support, but they care about a lot of other issues besides abortion. And they may hope their politicians go more on this, but they want a lot of other things taken care of, not just that. They're not single issue voters, despite what the pro-life lobby and pro-life Inc. claims. But you can even see this out of terrible issues like Leela Rose, who's one of these idiot pro-life lobby people. She's like, oh, Trump's betraying the base. Trump's betraying the base. Guess what she said about George Floyd? She had a whole post about George Floyd's faith and how powerful it was. And she's also was a DeSantis supporter. They were all despite Trump giving them the biggest victory, all these people were immediately wanting to vote for DeSantis. And they've all promised, and they also are a paper tiger. They continue to say, I remember back in the fall, back in 2023, they were saying Trump's going to lose the primary because of his issue on abortion. Guess what? He won every race except for Washington, D.C., the real home of Republican grassroots activism. Washington, D.C. That's the only place he lost. And he lost to Nikki Haley, who was also going on a more moderate direction on abortion than a lot of their voters wanted to say. So they have no muscle behind any of their threats. They're completely toothless when it comes to these threats. And they continue to lose referendums. They haven't won a single referendum, yet they continue to insist that this is the popular support and this is what the American people care about. It's like, no, if your position was so popular as you would claim, you could at least win one referendum in a red state, and they haven't won a referendum yet. And they completely, back in 2020, the whole pro-life movement tried to utilize Black Lives Matter stuff for their own cause. They tried to have Black baby lives matter. and all this like cringe shit. And it didn't even work. It didn't convince anyone. And they were just like demanding that the whole conservative establishment just cares about its own issue at the expense of anything else. And they've gotten away with this because, unlike a lot of other issues, whether it comes to gays, race, immigration, even guns, there's not a, there's not, you can be as bad optics as you want on abortion or as extreme as you want on abortion and not have to worry about getting canceled. And there's also kind of a moral fervor to the issue. And then it also appeals to kind of the egalitarian zeitgeist within our country. Because a lot of these people make similar appeals that you'll see, Black Lives Matter activists and others appealing that like, oh, the fundamental equality of all people and that everyone, they'll really try to deploy or appeal to the liberal egalitarianism of our society with this issue. It's one of the few issues where they can do that. I mean, you can't do that with guns and gay marriage and immigration with that, but you can with abortion. And due to the fact that none of them were canceled and that conservatism has entertained their radicalism for years, they've come under the impression that this is really what the American people want and that this is what conservative voters want, when in fact it's just been that they've been tolerating them for years. And it's just not that, even I could have told them that this is not as galvanizing of an issue as you would imagine. I could have known this at Daily Caller. I remember the Daily Caller, they would, really try to emphasize abortion stories on the front page as like, this is a big story, we need to get this. And generally they didn't do well in terms of traffic compared to like race stuff and immigration stuff or Trump stuff. It did not do well on the front page. It was not an issue. And it could be even something like, you would think that would get a big issue. Like they exposed how an abortion clinic is using dead fetuses of some sort. They could do that. It would not get as many clicks as the immigration stuff and the race stuff. So you could have already seen the conservative base isn't as focused in on this issue as the pro-life lobby would want you to imagine. Now, another great example of how cucked a lot of the fervent pro-life lobby, and I want to say this is not about pro-lifers in general, the ordinary people, ordinary conservatives who are very anti-abortion and want abortion restricted. I'm talking about the pro-life Inc., the people who work in this full time, that is the problem. One of the justices on the Arizona Supreme Court who ruled in favor of the old law is Clint Bolick. And Clint Bolick started his legal career working in favor of expanding civil rights law, and he wrote the book, Jeb Bush's immigration book, that called for amnesty. This is the type of people. So he is cucked on a lot of the issues we care about dismantling the civil rights regime and immigration. And guess what? He forces the Republican Party to embrace this type of law, which you may support this law. I think a lot of people would like the law, but it has zero popular support. They put that law to a popular referendum, it would probably lose 70-30. Because it's not even just simply, do you have the right, most of the referendums have been, do you think that the state legislature should have the power to restrict abortion? Not ban it, just place restrictions on it. And they all say no. Now imagine if just that law itself is like, do you support a law that bans abortion in all cases except in the situation where the life of a mother may be threatened? It would lose 30-70 at least. It might even lose like 80-20%, even in a state like Arizona. And they know that this issue is going to cost Arizona. And I think that a lot of these cucks on the Supreme Court, on the Arizona Supreme Court, may have intentionally done this in order to jeopardize Trump's chances of winning in November and Kari Lake's chances of winning in November, is that they want the old guard and back in tow. And you saw a lot of these cucks who are coming out and attacking Trump over this. Mike Pence came out and attacked Trump's position. And then James Lankford, the man who proposed the effective amnesty, terrible immigration deal earlier this year, came out and was like, oh, and he had always been talking to Republicans. It's like, it's wrong to stand up against my bill that would legalize all these illegal aliens in this country and then allow in 150,000 each month to come to our country. It's so wrong to not want to take Trump's position. It's like, where was that attitude towards your position on immigration? And also, Langford is also proposing this bill to combat anti-Semitism. So this is the type of people who are demanding we take the hardest line on abortion. They are not good on any other issue for the most part. These are not the base. This is not Trump supporters. These are Washington, D.C. apparatchiks who have been in power all along, and they want Trump gone, and they want the old guard back that doesn't care about immigration, doesn't care about any of the identity issues, but then is losing elections by wanting to support things like the Arizona law. So there's a couple different calculations here. One, Trump's stance is different from Kari Lake's. Kari Lake has almost gone semi-pro-choice here. I'll talk a little about Kari Lake in a moment, but I'm going to talk about Trump's position. Trump's position is essentially what a lot of the pro-life movement was before, or at least a lot of the conservatives were before when they were talking about the issues that we want to get rid of Roe v. Wade and return it to the states. And the states can govern this issue however they please. And this allows Alabama, Mississippi, Wyoming, Idaho, all these conservative states, Oklahoma, to restrict abortion and to place heartbeat bills or even stricter abortion restrictions. And it's allowed them to roll back abortion. Pre-2022, they couldn't even do this. Now they can. So this is like a development for abortion for the pro-life cause. And they're doing this despite popular opposition even in these states. So you have to take this as a win. And it's not going to impact those states. It's not going to flip Tennessee or Oklahoma blue. They don't have to worry about that. So in deep red states, and even states where it's more battleground, I mean, Texas has got a heartbeat bill, and so does Florida, and they're not likely to flip blue either. So they've been able to accomplish a lot, and that should be seen as a victory. But for whatever reason, they insist on a 15-week abortion ban, which that may affect these state laws that are stricter. I don't think that the pro-life movement wants that. They just want the 15-week ban. But that's just never going to pass. Democrats are never going to support it. And also a lot of Republicans, I can imagine the House Freedom Caucus and all these guys being like, we want a national heartbeat bill. And the pro-life movement, which, they'll say they're for this, but then when it came to a vote, they'll be opposed to it. I remember Lindsey Graham proposed this in 2022, 15-week ban. Guess what? The pro-life movement came out against it. So they'll say one thing and completely act in a different way. They couldn't get conservatives signed up for this. They can't get moderate Republicans signed up for it. And they're certainly not going to get a single Democrat signed up for the 15-week ban. So it's just not going to happen. So why insist on it when it's never going to happen? Just let states deal with this, which Trump is supportive. Now, this comes a little bit different with Kari Lake in Arizona, because Arizona, this is technically the state enacting this issue, but it's not even by the representatives of the people. This is by the Supreme Court, which is something funny with conservatives and Republicans. They're like, we're representing the will of the people, but the only way that they're really getting abortion restricted is by the most democratic measure is a popular referendum, and they, as I said, they keep losing on it. So it's up to courts, it's up to judges and to lawmakers. I mean, lawmakers are representing the people, but I'm sure if they put these laws to the people, it would not go well. But in some state, I think in Alabama they could pass. If they put a heartbeat bill on the referendum, they would win. But outside of that, it's all what's happening in Arizona. And Arizona is a battleground state, pretty socially liberal. We can complain about that all they want, but that's how it is. And Trump and Kari Lake lost the state. We're not gonna. Some people were gonna say technically they, by the end results, it showed a narrow loss. We'll say that. Obviously, there were some shenanigans in both cases. And what happened? And so the idea is that they're basically competing over 10,000 votes. And this is this is the most hotly contested state. And this is definitely an issue that could shift those 10,000 votes in the Democratic direction. Now, Republicans are insisting that they defend the Arizona law, even though it's overwhelmingly unpopular in the state. And it's just like a complete disregard of political calculation. Now, you can argue that Kari Lake is going a little bit too much in the other direction because she can openly condemn the law and demanded a repeal of it through the legislature. The problem is the state legislature is not likely to do something. The Republican leaders there, who are not very, they're like House Speaker and I think the Senate Majority Leader, they have a narrow majority in both chambers. They're not interested in a repeal. They're wanting more time to look over it. I think the reason they don't want to do this is that they know that it's going to expose serious rifts within their caucus, because the House Freedom Caucus in the state is fully opposed to a repeal and it's fully supportive of the bill. Carrie Lake wants a repeal. Despite her supporting the law back in 2022, she now looked at probably polling and realized that would kill her candidacy if she did not call for a repeal. But at the time, this is even a bigger affront to the pro-life lobby. I mean, the pro-life lobby should not be upset at Trump, as he's simply stating a realistic position that conservatives would have been in favor of prior to Dobbs, and it's completely unrealistic to expect him to support something that's just not going to happen legislatively. He's still supporting abortion bans that states are enacting. It's just the fact that the pro-life movement hates Trump, doesn't want him to win. In fact, they would rather lose on principle, and they want to get rid of Trump. Even though Trump gave them the biggest victories imaginable, they've always hated Trump, even when he takes logical positions on their own stances. Back in 2016, he was asked, should the woman who gets an abortion be legally punished? And he said yes. And the pro-life movement says abortion is murder. And then the whole pro-life movement was like, this is outrageous. How could you say that? It's like, well, if abortion's murder, how is the woman not being punished for it? That doesn't make any damn sense. That's like saying that if a woman hires a hitman to kill her husband, that she's legally blameless. That's not how this works. But the whole movement is built on simpery and outrageous respect for women. That's why the whole movement, in terms of their realistic political results, it's just 20-something butter-faced interns complaining about how they can't find a good man. And that's mainly what the pro-life movement contributes to: conservative discourse and conservative victories and conservative ideas. So that's something extremely important, obviously. But Lake's position, back to Lake, is something very different, because she is essentially saying this is a states' rights issue, and she's saying that they need to have a more moderate restriction. I think it's like she wants a 15-week ban of some sort, which is far more moderate than what it is. I mean, it's essentially her calling to legalize abortion when it's effectively illegal in the state, and that would be pro-choice, even though the 15-week ban is something that even the Democrats don't support. But in Arizona, they're putting abortion on the ballot. They have a bill to keep abortion legal up to 24 weeks. It'll win. They also have a ballot initiative in Florida as well about keeping abortion legal. That will probably win as well. If abortion referendums fail, or referendums to restrict abortion fail in Kentucky, Kansas, and Montana, there are obviously, if you're putting out referendums to legalize abortion in Arizona and Florida, they're likely going to win. And I think Florida, people have wondered whether the ballot initiative in Florida may cost Republicans the state. I think it's too red for it to even matter. It's a solidly red state. It's the same with Ohio. Ohio, even though this was last year, if they had put that in ballot initiative, well, with the Senate race is a little bit different, but I think with the presidential race, it's just so red, it's not going to matter. There's going to be plenty of Republican voters who are going to vote red, vote for Trump, and then they'll support the abortion legalization. That's just the case is. Now, it can get out enough. Now, when you have a state that's more battleground, such as Arizona, it can get out voters who would otherwise not vote, or voters who are on the fence, and they may change their position or who they vote for on the rest of the ballot because of this initiative. And that becomes a big problem with states like Michigan or Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, which I don't think that those can have referendums, which is why they're not putting them there. But it's primarily just Arizona and Florida. So it won't affect Florida. They're not going to flip Florida blue. Biden's Florida's in play. Florida is not in play. The Republicans are going to win Florida. The thing is, I think it's going to be extremely tough for Republicans to win Arizona, and they have to win Arizona if they want to win in 2024. Now, they could make it up with other states. There's a very few battleground states that are up this time. Ohio and Florida and Texas are not battleground states. Those are safe red states. New Hampshire, Virginia are safe blue states now. I know a lot of people are like saying, oh, Virginia is going to be up. No, it's not. Trump lost it by 10 points. It's not going to be up. Same with New Hampshire. These are, and Colorado is another safe blue state that would have been a few years ago considered a possible battleground state. Minnesota, I thought that they may win Minnesota because of George Floyd, and Democrats won overwhelmingly. It's no longer a battleground state. So some states have moved red since 2016. There's a lot like Missouri, Iowa, which we don't even talk about. Ohio, Florida, obviously the big ones. Texas, it's not even much. It was always thought that they may start going blue because of demographic change. It's not happening yet. So you have that. So the real battleground states you have are Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia and North Carolina. Those are the states that you really have to worry about here. I think Trump's going to win North Carolina. I think he's going to win Georgia. I think he's going to win Wisconsin. And he won North Carolina. Out of those states, back in 2020, he won. Once the official results, he only won North Carolina. But he's going to keep that in his win column. So he could make up, if he loses in Arizona, he could make up for it by winning the Rust Belt again. I think he could have, and maybe even winning Nevada. But it's still a problem if he loses Arizona, because then they had a very winnable Senate seat, and they lose it. And maybe that makes it for a much narrower majority they're going to have in the Senate. I mean, I think the Republicans are going to win the Senate no matter what, regardless of what happens in the presidential race. I'm still confident that Trump will win the presidential race, but I'll conclude that in remarks about what's at hand. I mean, really what we have now is Republicans trying to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. Victory is almost certain. The only two things they have to worry about is Trump getting convicted, and abortion. And even with Trump's convictions, the serious ones he doesn't have to worry about. It doesn't look like the documents case is going to happen this year. It doesn't look like the J6 case, which is the most serious one, is going to happen this year. The Georgia case is falling apart. All he has to worry about is the Stormy Daniels one, which is the least serious of them all. Everyone says it's a weak case and should end in a hung jury or not guilty. And if he's found guilty, it may not affect the election that much because it's not one of the serious convictions that could happen or indictments. J6 and documents are a little bit different. I think if he did get convicted of J6, that would be it'd be very tough for him to win afterwards. But Stormy Daniels, I don't think that's going to have as much of an effect as Democrats hope it will, or liberals hope it will. But those are the things addressed to Trump. Now it's abortion, which they are as dead set on making this an issue when they need to make it not a non-issue in 2024. And they need to keep the issue on immigration, the economy, global chaos, Biden being senile, Biden being weak, decline in life quality. There's so many other things that they win on. And instead, Republicans want to make the one issue that they lose on a central issue. And they're doing this through potential bans on IVF or threatening IVF, court cases on abortion pills, the Arizona case, and even push for having a national ban. They are really trying to make this issue that they need to just say it's a states' rights issue. We'll let the states have this. And even if they want to do something nationally, they have to think smart and pragmatically. They cannot run on this issue and hope to win. Even if you want to do something nationally, you could just talk about other things. And then once you get elected, you can do things. Because the only way to restrict abortion is to win elections. That's it. You can appoint judges who will make calls to restrict it, or you can have a legislature to restrict it. That's the only way you can do this. You can run on a principled stance and then lose and watch Democrats roll back these abortion restrictions, or you can win elections and add to them. That's the real choice. And pro-life movement prefers to lose elections because they're anti-Trump and don't like all of Trump's ickiness and his racism. And so they don't care about losing. I mean, they're going to get money no matter what. And if the Republicans win, they know that it's actually a huge blow to their movement. because they could see a guy who they openly condemned and they said he's betraying us, then wins an election. And then that makes Republicans like, why do we have to listen to these people? If Kari Lake wins, it's the biggest defeat for the pro-life lobby within Republican politics that I can think of. There has not been someone who is effectively pro-choice Republican win an election in a long time. And if she wins in defiance of the pro-life movement, that is sending a signal to other Republicans to adopt that position and is further weakening their cause. And I think they're overestimating their power and influence within the party, and it could cost them if Republicans win in November. Now, I think if Trump loses, they could still have their influence diminish, but it's a major blow to them if Trump wins and Kari Lake wins in November. I think that's why they're eager for them to lose this election, because they feel that it may cost them their sense of influence within the conservative movement, within Republican politics. So some concluding remarks. Pro-life lobby, Pro-Life Inc. is something different from pro-life movement, or pro-lifers in general. Evangelicals and all these people are pro-life, anti-abortion, but they care about a lot of other things. They're not single-issue voters. The people who are single-issue voters work in Washington, D.C. and work in Republican politics. They are much more of a swamp, top-down lobby type of group than others. But unlike the gun rights lobby or any other type of lobby, they don't provide any volunteers or activists or even any money. You know, what do you think about the March for Life? March for Life is generally Catholic schools bringing all these kids who can't even vote for a weekend trip to Washington, D.C. I mean, it does demonstrate something, but clearly by what's seen in the 2022 race and these referendums, they're not capable of mobilizing this mass base that they've been promising Republicans for years that exists. There's not a single issue voter coalition on this issue in the same way that there is for guns. If like Republicans go against guns, the gun rights lobby can mobilize people to punish them. Pro-life movement looks like they can't punish anyone except for nagging people on Twitter. That's pretty much it. Second is Trump takes the right line. Is that just leave it to states, keep it out of the national focus. Focus on what issues are the main strengths for Republicans. And you have to take a pragmatic tone. If you want to see abortion restriction, you have to win elections. And if you want to adopt the pro-life lobby's maximalist position, you're going to lose elections. I mean, that will happen in Arizona. I mean, if Kari Lake fully supported the Arizona statute the Supreme Court upheld, she would lose the election. Guaranteed. She may still lose the election because of this, even though she's taken a different stance on it. But if she fully supported it, election's over. Ruben Gallego is going to be the next senator from Arizona. And that's why she's taking a different position. I mean, you could disagree with, I mean, she may go too far, but I mean, political calculus, that's what she has to do to win. And unlike Gallego, she would actually vote for restrictions on abortion if she got to the Senate. Gallego wouldn't. And so it'd be much harder to restrict abortion from a national level, even if Kari Lake got there. And also this issue hinders the Arizona legislature, is that this issue could lead to a Democratic landslide in the legislature, and they will pass. I mean, well, they already have the referendum going, and that referendum is likely to win. But there's going to be no way that they could even roll back or challenge any of that referendum. So with everything going right for Republicans, and I mean, it feels like deja vu to 2022. Everything's going right for Republicans. It looks like they can win. Even with the problems with Trump's legal issues, doesn't matter. Even their problems with fundraising doesn't look like that matter, because everything has continued to go wrong under Biden, and there's no reason for voters to vote Democrat because the economy sucks, inflation's rising, immigration is a complete crisis that you have. There's this feeling that our cities are sinking into the abyss. All these issues that are there to support Republicans. Certain conservatives want to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory by making abortion the central issue. And they're so delusional because they've been in a type of safe space for years within the swamp, and they think that the majority of people are behind their issue because they relied on fake polls and their own delusions and own wish casting to imagine that there's a secret silent majority of single issue abortion voters out there, that they're insisting on their issue in order to make Republicans lose. And a lot of these people actually want Republicans to lose because they want Trumpism defeated and buried, and they want to return back to the good old days of pre-Trump Republican Party that wanted amnesty and, cucked on every issue. But guess what? At least they demanded abortion or Arizona-style abortion laws, and that's all they really care about. And when they're not being a good coalition partner within the Republican Party, I think it's time to ignore them. And it's not to go totally pro-choice. I mean, you're still going to be passing abortion restrictions. And if Republicans went totally pro-choice, like saying oh, we don't want to fight on this issue anymore, it's only 20 weeks, they would lose some of their voters. But as long as they're presented as the pro-life alternative, an anti-abortion alternative to the Democrats, those pro-life voters or people who care about that issue will vote Republicans. And they also care about a lot of other things. But at the same time, it requires a pragmatic attitude towards this, because the overwhelming majority of Americans are on the opposite side. And the only way to accomplish your goals is by winning 2 elections. And you have to be pragmatic and realistic about this. And I think in a large part, as I said, the pro-life lobby doesn't want this pragmatism and realism, because they want Republicans to lose and they want Trump to lose. And I think that's why you have to ignore them in this fight, is that they're not really the base. They don't represent the base as they claim. And that's why you do need to listen to the voice of the reason rather than the voice of these shrill 20-something-year-old women who work in conservative ink and and temporarily stop tweeting about good men scarcity and how Trump is a racist, to say that they're the base, and the base is just not going to vote for Trump in November unless he adopts their position, which is just not true. So that is my opinion on that. I think that may not go down well with the audience, but I'm going to stick to my position. And we will see. If Carrie Lake wins, that will be an earth-shattering moment for Republican politics if she does win. And I always say, if she wins her election, she is the front runner for the 2028 nomination. I mean, the only other person I see is a strong challenger is Mark Robinson, but I think Mark Robinson may be a little bit too much for for a national primary or for the nomination. But I think if Carrie Lake wins, she's the front runner, and that signals something. I've said too much about this. Talking about Carrie Lake is a topic for another day. But that is it for the questions. And now we're going to move along to the rest of the Convolete questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Convolete option at Highly Respected Substack. And that's at highly-respected.com. And make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there. So the first question comes from Paul. Paul asks, your last article, well, this is the last article. It's an article from a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, I was supposed to answer Paul's question through the mailbag, but there were so many questions. Unfortunately, got lost. But he was talking about the one, we're not ready for a revolution. And he said, brought up how one of the greatest problems the right has is that we need to have a revolution of people's consciousness in order to solve the most fundamental problems of the country. In the past, you've mentioned methods like getting involved in the Republican Party, Republican institutions like Young Republicans, etc., to influence what are acceptable, unacceptable ideas within conservatism, and using the free or must Twitter to spread our views. Realistically, what other methods can the right use to make our views more and more a part of the Overton window on a scale, or move the Overton window on a large scale, especially for what you call the complacent majority that does not really spend much time or thought on politics, or for the demographic that can only get things getting bad make them open-minded to our views. I mean, it's just really a fact of getting our views out there. I think utilizing X, Twitter, Elon Musk's X or Twitter is whatever you want to call it. I still like to call it Twitter, but you're not supposed to call it Twitter anymore. It actually deboosts your posts, and I think my post would get a lot more engagement. But I keep saying Twitter, so I'm having to now say X rather than Twitter, I learned. It is... It is just a matter of getting our views out there. Most people are just not aware of our views. Even today, even with what you see people get out there and say, you have to make them aware of this stuff. These people just don't think about this stuff at all. And if you just tell them, like, hey, what do you think about the Great Replacement? Isn't it weird that there are fewer whites now? What is our country going to be like when we're a white minority country? Stuff like this is just like things that they've never heard about. And some of the ways you can get that outside of X is just getting Republican politicians to talk about this. When Trump talks about anti-white racism, that is a shift. That is a vibe shift, as they would say, as the kids would say. And you push these ideas and questions into people's minds that they would otherwise not think of. And it's mainly our position right now is just to get those ideas out there and introduce them to people. And to not have them restricted, or to not do stupid things that makes these ideas seem toxic to people. Like doing another Charlottesville. Not the best idea to get our ideas out there. You want mainstream Republican politicians to talk about this. You want mainstream conservative commentators to talk about this. And getting those ideas out there and push them is through social media, through the power of social media, through the power of TikTok videos. Having a viral TikTok video on something like the Great Replacement could do wonders and ask people about that. And once it, if the news media picks it up, then they have to address, like, why is this so bad that people are talking about this? Is this wrong? Is this supposed to be beyond the par that people are talking about this? So you get those people asking questions. So it's just a matter of reaching people in the biggest way possible to do that. And our best avenue right now is social media. And that's why I think we should be skeptical of efforts to restrict TikTok, even though I know TikTok is full of a lot of stupid content and stuff. But it does have the potential to make content on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram that would never go viral on there to go viral on TikTok. I mean, look at how Andrew Tate built up his base. There's still there's still the potential for videos expressing wrong thing to go viral on TikTok. And that's a big reason why they want to restrict TikTok, because they're blaming TikTok for making the youth anti-Israel. So that's just the really thing right now. I mean, getting involved in Republican politics and getting these questions out there, there are still things like, just asking Republican politicians about these questions. I mean, even look at what the Greer War did in advancing our issues just by trolling and harassing Charlie Kirk. Now look at what Charlie Kirk does. Charlie Kirk is essentially on the side of his interrogators from the Greer Wars. And so things like that can really move the ball forward. And so it just comes from those types of problems. And it is, like, as I said, it is a question of changing people's consciousness. And you have to do that first before you can have any type of radical ideas. There's a lot of people who want to put the cart before the horse and just imagine, like, let's have secession without people having any type of real white identity focus. It's like you would end up with a stupid situation like you would see if Texas decided to secede, and it would just try to bring in more Indian immigrants. So you have to be unclear about that. K-Max has decided to ask 4 questions today, so we'll go through them. It's fine. You can ask as many questions as you want. So he asked, in reference to your talk last week about the left always winning the cultural battles and the right losing because the center always shifts to the left, is part of the right's constant focus on economics. A friend told me once in a campaign you will see a Republican campaign on cultural issues like immigration, anti-white hate, and affirmative action, but then only deliver on tax cuts and deregulation of Wall Street. The Democrats will run on tax hikes on the rich, taxing corporations that outsource American jobs, and more regulations of Wall Street, but only deliver on more trans rights. Both sides just claim that their lands and sea ground to the other. The right only cares to win economically and sell out their base culturally. The left only cares to win culturally and sell out their base economically. Well, it depends. There is truth to that, but it's like how the cultural things happen is not through legislation. It's through the culture itself or through the bureaucracy and how it changes. It's not like Congress is passing a gender pronouns bill. It's not. Or Democrats are passing amnesty. It's not. Like, nothing is getting passed. The main thing is that it's easier to pass tax cuts than it is to pass a ban on affirmative action. And Democrats, most of the stuff that they've done, the major stuff they've done is not so much cultural issues. I mean, the biggest thing that they've accomplished, and many, many years has been Obamacare. That was not a cultural issue or a social issue. But it's just that most of the way the bureaucracy runs, and a lot of these issues when it comes to crime, happen on a state and local level, and it's just like a deep blue state will then just legalize looting and effectively legalize looting, and then you see looting happen. Or they'll pass, they'll investigate reparations. But even Democrats don't even deliver on cultural issues. They all say that, like, we're going to study reparations. And then when the bill comes out, they're like, actually, we changed our mind about reparations. It's what's happening in California. When they, California realized they couldn't afford reparations. And so they're like, well, that was a nice study. We're going to put that away now. It's just a way... It's just how this country operates, is that left-wing victories usually happen outside of legislation. It happens through the culture itself, or through bureaucracy, or even sometimes executive action, rather than through legislation. And the only things that Republicans can get through legislation is tax cuts. And the deregulation happens on an executive level. But I mean, with the president, whether immigration is enforced or not depends on whether you have a Republican or Democrat as president. If it's a Republican, then you can have rigorous enforcement of immigration law. If you have a Democrat, you have total open borders like under Biden. So I don't know if it's left's always winning the cultural battles and the right losing because the center always shifts left as part of this right's constant focus on economics. It's just, some of it is because right from Reagan onwards, the right's central focus was economics. It's about cutting taxes and cutting regulations, and they achieved that. I mean, the social issues they included, gun rights. They've worked to secure gun rights, despite in a large part because of popular demand to restrict gun rights. It's actually, we have more gun rights now than we did 30 years ago. Similar situation with abortion as well. But those were the social issues. They haven't been as focused on the identity stuff. I mean, affirmative action, they've worked hard through lawfare to accomplish. And they finally are delivering on affirmative action in the same way that they're delivering on abortion. And unlike abortion, it's overwhelmingly popular to cut at affirmative action. And I think if Trump gets into power, affirmative action, as we know it, could be effectively over. And that would be a major victory. And they've been talking about affirmative action, hostile to affirmative action, for almost 50 years. Really, actually, for longer. But I mean, it's been a major issue for Republicans for many, many years, and now they're finally accomplishing it. So it's just a matter of where these things occur. And if Trump is campaigning on immigration, he will do a lot on immigration, but you just don't expect anything to happen through the legislative process. This is more just going to the way of the legislative branch just doesn't matter as much as it did. All it is there for is to approve nominees to the bureaucracy or to the judiciary, and to pass temporary budget bills to fund the bureaucracy. That's about it. The judiciary and the bureaucracy are the real arbiters of power. That's how things accomplish. And the left is able to accomplish a lot of its victories through its control of the bureaucracy and through judges, as well as greater control of the culture. And Republicans can't hope to win cultural battles through the legislative process. I would say that. It's worthy of return. I've talked about this a lot, but I think it's that Republicans kind of hope that their lawmakers, I mean, it's like with what you see now in the Republican legislature. I mean, they have like a 1-seat majority in the House, and they expect the House to wage a cultural war. It can't happen. It has to be done through other means, and Republicans and conservatives are lacking in those means compared to liberals. Second question, the sports question returns. When it comes to whites in sports versus blacks, is it fair to say we are more team-oriented and less one-on-one in general? Or is it that more of a media thing where white athletes just do not get the media attention that black athletes do? Casual fans tend to be drawn to a sport by the one superstar rather than parody or tons of good players. However, the names are LeBron, Kobe, Mahomes, Barry Bonds, or Tiger Woods. Even white sports like hockey rarely, if ever, Does the media promote one superstar above all else to promote and know them by one name, put them in? I guess this Caitlin Clark was the first one, but she's female. Am I wrong or you agree? Well, I think when it comes to basketball, whites are known for being, if the coach wants a more team-oriented focus of the team, whites are better for that in college basketball. While black players tend to be more ball hogs than just about themselves, which it works well in the NBA, I guess, or maybe not so well as these guys elevate themselves. And also, if they're wanting to get into the NBA, it's better to stand out as a superstar. While your team may not win in the NCAA tournament, it elevates your draft prospects to be this all-star player. And so, yeah, that's always been the case, is that these teams will have like a majority white starting lineup, and they'll go all the way in the Final Four and they'll win. But then few of these players ever end up in the NBA. Meanwhile, a team that got eliminated in the second round, they have the guys like the number one draft pick next year. So, yeah, I think that is the case with being more team-oriented. But it goes different. I mean, with the NFL, you have to be team-oriented. You just can't be an individual show-off. In basketball, you can be an individual show-off. And it's much harder within football. Football is basketball is a team sport, but there's way more ability for a one star just to dominate the court. While in football, if you could be a really good quarterback, but if your offensive line sucks, then you're not going to be that good of a quarterback. It's very much like team-oriented. Like everyone's got to be on the same page and playing as a team. And generally, the biggest players now are the ones that are showing the most. It's down to individual skill, like quarterback. And those have always been the biggest stars in it. And, yeah, when it comes to hockey, I think it's just that hockey, the real reason a lot of superstars is a lot of them are foreign. And it's always been a sport that hasn't been appealing to the Sun Belt because the Sun Belt, doesn't have snow. People don't grow up playing hockey. And it's always been weird that, when hockey teams start up in the South. It's always been more of a Canadian, New England, Midwest sport. Places where it snows a lot and they play hockey as kids growing up. And a lot of their biggest stars are foreigners. And basketball's having that problem too, is that its best players are now foreigners. And even though they're white, most people are just not going to be that into Jokic and Doncic. But when it comes to the matter of college basketball, it's absolutely the case is that, these majority white teams, they'll play as a team, no ball hogs there, taking up they'll play as a team. They'll do extremely well in the NCAA tournament. And then a lot of these guys do not go onto the NBA. Meanwhile, there'll be a team that has like a major ball hog, but he's like a really good athlete and he will go on into the NBA. So, yeah, there's definitely that team orientation focus when it comes to races. Now, K-Max, that's it for the question. But for K-Max' third question, it's going to go for the mailbag. Any other questions I don't answer, it's going for the mailbag. I think I told most people if they have a mailbag question, it is this. He did bring up OJ Simpson, which I needed to address. OJ Simpson died last week, and so he brought up an OJ Simpson question. He said, CNN contributor Ashley Allison stated the following: he wasn't a social justice leader, but he represented something for the black community in the moment in that trial, particularly because there were two white people who had been killed. Allison said. Mark Lamont Hill stated, OJ Simpson was an abusive liar who abandoned his community long before he killed two people in cold blood. His acquittal for murder was the correct and necessary result of a racist criminal legal system. Scott, is the saying the quiet part out loud? Yes. And he's also asking my view of the O.J. Simpson case and what it said about race relations then and black people's reaction to the not guilty verdict. And it's absolutely saying the quiet part out loud. I mean, the only reason O.J. was exonerated was because of the Rodney King officers being exonerated, being found not guilty, which then led to the L.A. riots. And with O.J., there was this fear that if they find him guilty, that there could be a repeat of the LA riots, and many of the blacks felt it was payback for the officers involved in the Rodney King beating. And they just felt that, this black guy couldn't be found guilty. And we see this a lot now. This is more common where there'll be 100% guilty black perpetrator, and the victim will be non-black. It can be either Asian or white. I can imagine if it's Hispanic. There's been a bunch of cases, and black jurors like not guilty. It's like, but all the evidence says he's guilty. It's like, he not guilty. And so there's been a lot of cases where a guy is 100% dead to rights, guilty of murder, and they find him not guilty. There was a case in South Carolina a few years ago where a guy shot a retired fire chief in cold blood. There's no justification for it, but they felt that he said he had felt scared in the moment because it was like in the morning. This guy and the fire chief posed no threat to him, and they found him not guilty. So this is now more common. OJ was just a very high profile case, and a lot of the white jurors got browbeat and bullied into saying he was not guilty because of the black jurors insisting that he's not guilty no matter the evidence. And they've even interviewed the jurors, and they said that this is all payback towards a racist justice system. OJ's guilt or evidence had no matter in this. This is all that they felt that they were railroading, a racist justice system was railroading a black guy, and they were going to have no part in it, and they're going to stick it to the white man with their view of OJ. And it was very much racially divided because like whites were appalled that this happened and blacks were celebrating. And OJ was an odd person to be the representative of this because OJ himself spent all his social friends were white. He was not really, one with the community. He was arguably white's favorite black guy, along with Bill Cosby at the time, because he was in a bunch of movies. He seemed like, he's such a nice guy. He was a great running back. He's, in all these movies. Like, OJ's just a nice guy. That's why he was not picked for the Terminator. He was, up to be the Terminator, and they felt he was too he was too unbelievable to be seen as a killer, which is funny in hindsight. And yeah, that was just a big part of race relations then. And there's just like all these colorful characters in the case. OJ was a colorful character. There's Kato Kalin. There was Mark Furman, the lead detective. There were so many interesting characters. And they've tried to do an OJ Simpson case again because it was massive hit for TV ratings. They tried to do it with Trayvon. Didn't really have interesting characters. There's just kind of weird characters. Like Zimmerman himself was a strange character. The witnesses were strange. They just, even the prosecutors and attorneys involved weren't as interesting. Rittenhouse had a little bit more interesting case, but it wasn't racially involved. I think that the real interesting thing from that case is there were several normie Americans who felt that he had shot black people, and then they watched the case and it's like, he didn't shoot a single black person. He almost shot one black person, thankfully for Rittenhouse, because he would have been found guilty if he had. He did not shoot one of the black guys who was attacking him. That black guy smartly backed off with his hands up, and that's likely how Rittenhouse was able to save himself. There was more interesting cases there. The judge was interesting. The attorneys were more interesting. Even the defense witnesses, Gage Grosenkreutz was interesting. Groskreutz, I forget his full name. I remember it was Gage. It just had a little bit more, but it was not quite like OJ's case, which was just an entire media circus. And there was like big moments when he's like trying to fit on the glove, and it's like, if the glove don't fit, you must acquit. There's Johnny Cochran, also another character who is the lead defense attorney. So it was an interesting case, and it was definitely a reflection of 90s race relations. I should do a full OJ Simpson case is worthy of its own IQ supplement, and so I will do that later on, because there's just so many things to go into about 90s race relations, OJ's background and history, the Johnny Cochran's involvement, what's Mark Furman and what it says about the LAPD and the alleged racism of the LAPD. There's so many angles to go into. So I'm going to save up most of the rest of my takes for that IQ supplement. But I would just say that, yes, it was a case of black jurors just ignoring the evidence and just saying, we want to stick it to this racist justice system. So I think I just have one more question, but I will Actually, I have two more questions. Anything else that's for the mailbag? We have one from Appalachian. He said, I've been seeing a lot of tensions between boomers, millennials, and Gen X versus Zoomers on X. Do you think this is because boomers have lived so much longer than their parents and that they have refused to give up the reins to the next generations in the workforce and even housing market, stunning them more and more? Perhaps it's gotten to the point where Gen Z doesn't have any hopes in getting a respectable career or lifestyle because it's filled with older generations. Now that Zoomers are competing with Gen Xers in the workplace, no wonder tensions are high and respect for older generations are gone. Yeah, I just talked. He had asked this question before my article about this, but yes, there is a lot of generational conflict. I think the boomers versus millennials has died out because boomers are just retired and enjoying retirement, and they're millennial kids, and millennials are just doing whatever. The main conflict now is Gen X versus Zoomers because it's always parents versus children, and that is the parents versus children. And it's very apparent on the right because a lot of the right is, especially online right, is Gen X, and the millennials just kind of burned out. There's still millennials there. I'm a millennial. But it's primarily just Gen X versus Zoomers, and Gen X are a lot more bitter, I think, than Boomers, and unlike Boomers, they grew up as like the children of divorce and chaotic family environment, and they have no memory of the 50s. I mean, their idyllic time is the fucking 90s, which conservatives at the time thought was Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, the best-selling conservative book of that time was Slouching Towards Gomorrah. It was no one's idea of a conservative utopia at the time, but now it is because Gen Xers dominate right-wing discourse. And a lot of them had been divorced, and maybe their lives haven't turned out well. And a lot of their bitterness is directed towards Zoomers, who they raised or they view as the new generation, and that they are like pussies, and they don't like this. And this really much animated that Apple River stabbing where Romanian immigrants stabbed 5 Zoomers over a dispute over snorkel gear. And the reason why, I'm going to repeat myself, the reason why that so many people gravitated towards this issue was because this was a Gen Xer who was disrespected by Zoomers, and they felt this was getting back at these Zoomers who suck. And that's why people were so animated by it, because they saw themselves in Nikolai Mew, who was the defendant in the case. And so that's really what animated it, and I criticized it in my article, so I don't want to repeat myself too much. I would just add a few other things. I think there was a couple of other things that were involved. I did mention the self-defense case, which was there. I also do think that there's, for some other people, despite a lot of people imagining that they were jocks in high school and that they were the bullies, a lot of them were not. And the people he stabbed were jocks. These guys were all on their football team, and these were the high school jocks that he was facing up against. And a lot of these guys, I think, some people, I'm not saying majority, but I think some of the people that I was arguing with and really into this, they felt it as a way of getting back at the bullies and almost a school shooter mindset with this, which I don't think it's not very right wing. It's filled with resentment and grievance, and I think it's even more disturbing than the generational conflict that was found at the Apple River. But outside of that, I just wanted to make that point. Yes, generational conflict is more apparent. I think it's less boomers versus millennials. During the 2016 race and the 2010s is primarily boomers versus millennials, but it's now shifted to Gen X and Zoomers, and Gen X and Zoomers are even further apart, and Gen Xers are more bitter than Zoomers, and Zoomers a little bit more far out there than millennials. People want to attack on millennials, but Zoomers are even more involved in left-wing trends. Like there's a higher percentage of them who identify as LGBT, and that's far less white, and those issues are now apparent. And I think it's pretty bad with the right, because the online right back in the 2010s was like, we're the youth, we're a young movement, and now a lot of it is middle-aged people pretending that they're youth, because a lot of Gen Xers don't accept that they're middle-aged, but they eventually have to. So I don't want to hate it too much on Gen Xers. I know we've got a lot of Gen Xers. Listen, not all Gen Xers. It's the same with not all Zoomers. I always want to emphasize it's not all, but I think that there is a certain demographic out there that wants to emphasize generational conflict. And as I've always said, I'm not into class conflict. I'm not into generational conflict. I'm just about standing up for white Americans, regardless of your age. But there are tendencies, depending on your age, or class that sometimes come to the fore, but we need to tone down on those things. So the final question, New England refugee, I usually end on him, but he had a question, but we're saving that for the mailbag. We have a final question from Mystery. Final two questions from Mystery. The first question he asked is my thoughts on the Rufo-Yarvin debate, and I would have said this for the mailbag, but I already have an article coming out tomorrow on this, or it should be out tomorrow, on Rufo-Yarvin debate and I am 1776. It's a mainly entertaining debate because they're talking about completely different things. Like Yarvin's like, America's been bad since the beginning. It was corrupt at the core. Let's talk about the 1770s. And then Rufo is essentially talking about conservative ink platitudes and Claremont platitudes about the constitutional order, and this is a great country and we're pragmatic and we need to focus on activism in the here and now. So it's a difference between somebody talking about grandiose ideas versus activism. And I think neither one of them came out really well in this because they're both talking over each other and just insulting it. I think Rufo is more important to focus on because Rufo is having a big impact on Republican politics and conservative movement. And Rufo sees himself as this new William F. Buckley for the new right, despite him being a never Trumper. And he was even he reluctantly supported Trump in 2020, and then he went back straight to discarding Trump. And he himself just recently adopted all this stuff, but he sees fit to police what we should believe. But yeah, Trump, or rather Rufo is more interesting to talk about. And I think the debate exposed a lot of the shallowness of Rufoism. Is essentially what Rufo wants is that Rufo wants to add some base terminology from the online right, the dissident right, but essentially at its core, it's the same old conservatism with new packaging. And we want something more to address the issues of today. And Trumpism represented that. And Rufo does not present an answer of that. And when we're talking, he's fine with his activism. He's getting results. But when it comes to the intellectual discussion or the metapolitical discussion, Rufo leaves a lot lacking, as I've said in other columns and podcasts before. But read the column tomorrow and I'll fully answer that question. His second question is gender wars question. I understand why women in the late 20s dislike it when men in their late 20s date younger women, but in my experience dating down, I've noticed girls really dislike it if I make any acknowledgement whatsoever on the fact that they're younger. I'm talking like a 5-year gap, nothing crazy. That strikes me as odd. Is this a recent influence of woke culture, or would this have been the case in the past? Any thoughts on why that'd be so triggering? I don't know about the past, but women are more hyper-focused on the age gap because there's so many single women in their 30s who are not, and this goes back to I love always citing my articles, but it goes back to an article I wrote on the marriage crisis and what's happening. And there are more and more women who wait to their 30s to marry, and the type of guy they want to marry is the Chad 30-something, successful guy who's got everything going, he's handsome, whatever. And they have trouble getting that guy because that guy wants to date a girl in her mid to early 20s. And so they've elevated this discussion that it's pedophilia and age gap discourse in order to shame those guys into dating women who are closer in their age because they demand that those men date them. And so I think that effect is having it even on younger women, because younger women, I've even noticed it a little bit too, is that sometimes younger women, if you talk to them and stuff, they'll be like, well, I'm so much younger. And it's like, you're 25. It's like, it's not like, this is not going up to a 16-year-old, but they'll still be under this impression because there's a cultural influence, is that all these older women are also trying to shame the younger women for dating older men because they want them to back off these men that they expect to wife them up. But they're having difficulties with that. So I think that's it's an influence over these 30-something women who are trying to scare off and shame younger women, and young women just accept that comes to them for the culture. And if the culture is telling them that it's weird for a 30-year-old to date a 25-year-old, then they're going to imbibe in that. And so I think it's definitely a result of that there's more and more women who are single in the 30s, and they're demanding men their age settle down with them when the men those age want to get someone younger. And so they've elevated that the age gap is really pedophilia, and these young women should stay away from these predators. And so that is my thoughts on that. And that is it for this Highly Respected today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. We've got more great content coming up this week. As I said, we've got a Rufo article coming up on Tuesday. We got mailbag on Wednesday. We'll have another column on Thursday. And then IQ supplement on Friday. So be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.